Good morning, 5th grade. Today we're going to continue reading in our text, Okie Go Home. But before we get started, we have a quick write. It says, describe what life was like for farmers during the Great Depression. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the focus question. Our focus question today is, what factors contributed to the Dust Bowl? And why did Okies move to California? Was it a good decision? Why or why not? Today we're going to be focusing on reading multiple accounts of the same event so that we can determine how different people viewed the Dust Bowl the same way and how different people viewed the Dust Bowl differently. Our vocabulary words for today are drought, and that is when it doesn't rain for a very long time. So this is what land might look like if there is a drought. If you notice, there's nothing growing on the land because plants need water. Number 2 is reservoir. A reservoir is a natural or a man-made supply of water. This is an example of a reservoir. And the last word is parched, and that describes someone that's extremely thirsty. Or we could say that during a drought, the land is parched, meaning the land needs water. Go ahead and turn the page, and we're going to begin reading on page 6 of your text. So I'm going to scroll down to page 6. You should be on the page that has this little boy sitting in the chair. All right? And we're going to start reading at the top of the page that says throughout the 1930s. As we're reading, box 1 asks us about the obstacles that farmers faced in the Midwest. And so the Midwest, remember, is that area in the middle of the United States where a lot of people were farmers because the land was good and flat for farming. All right, so we're going to get started reading at throughout the 1930s, and you are underlining obstacles that farmers faced. Throughout the 1930s, tens of thousands of displaced tenants and sharecroppers were evicted from their homes. They joined the nation's drifting population of migrant farm laborers. For some 4 million men, women, and children who harvested crops on commercial farms from Maine to California. All right, so we know one of the obstacles is that they were evicted from their homes. And so you can go ahead and underline that in your text. Let's keep reading. Meanwhile, as if the nation's economic crisis weren't bad enough, nature dealt a crippling blow to farmers in the nation's heartland. And that's another way of saying that farmers living in the middle part of the United States had it especially hard during this time. And we're going to figure out why. One of the worst droughts in memory gripped the Great Plains from North Dakota to Texas. Along with the lowest rainfall ever recorded in the region, a succession of blistering heat waves baked the plains. Ponds, streams, and reservoirs dried up. Crops withered in the fields. In some places, staggering livestock, weak and wild-eyed from hunger, bawling helplessly for water, dropped dead in their tracks. Okay, so we're going to go back in this paragraph, and there's a few obstacles that we want to make sure we underline. First, it says as there was one of the worst droughts in memory. Underline that and put a 1 out beside it. That's our first obstacle. Then it says, along with the lowest rainfall, that's another phrase for drought, a succession of blistering heat waves baked the plains. So not only was it dry, but it was also very hot. Underline a succession of blistering heat waves baked the plains. Put a number 2 out beside it. Then it says ponds, streams, and reservoirs dried up. That's another obstacle. People didn't have water. Crops withered in the fields. That's number 4. And the livestock dropped dead in their tracks. That's number 5. Okay, so make sure you have these obstacles underlined and numbered. And I want you to write them in the box, and you can just number them in this box. So number 1 is one of the worst droughts in memory took place. And you'll press pause to write down your answer in between each one. Number 2, blistering heat waves occurred at the same time. Number 3, ponds, streams, and reservoirs dried up. Number 4, crops withered in the fields. And number 5, staggering livestock, weak and wild-eyed from hunger, dropped dead in their tracks. You could just say livestock died. That's easier. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for box 2. All right, we're going to keep reading, and we're going to focus. Box 2 asks us what factors contributed to the Dust Bowl. So these obstacles that we just listed are contributing factors, but we are going to read this third paragraph and figure out which one of these obstacles specifically led to the Dust Bowl. So we're at poor farming practices. Poor farming practices and overgrazing by cattle and sheep had exhausted much of the region's topsoil. As a result, the 1930s drought was unusually destructive. Prairie winds swept down on this loose, dry soil, scooped it up, and carried it into the air as enormous, choking clouds of dust. Terrifying wind-driven dust storms called black blizzards boiled up from the parched land and rolled across entire states, darkening the sky, advancing at 50 miles an hour as thousands of fleeing geese, ducks, and smaller birds raced for their lives ahead of the approaching storm. And so we want to know what were the factors that contributed to the Dust Bowl. The author starts talking about the Dust Bowl at the sentence that says prairie winds swept down on this loose, dry soil. That's the beginning where he's talking about these dust storms. So he tells us why they happened before that. And there are 2 reasons, and you have enough space in box 2 to write down those 2 reasons. The first reason has to do with poor farming practices and overgrazing by cattle and sheep. That means that the farmers weren't farming the correct way, and they weren't allowing their animals to eat the grass in the correct way. There's a certain way to do that so that you take care of the soil. And the way that they were doing it wasn't taking care of the soil. So that's number 1. Write this first sentence in the first part of box number 2. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the second part. And then it says, because of these poor farming practices, the drought was unusually destructive. Okay, so that second sentence you can write in box 2. As a result, the 1930s drought was unusually destructive. All right. Let's go to box number 3. It says underline and identify the types of figurative language in the sentence below. It says terrifying wind-driven storms called black blizzards boiled up from the parched land and rolled across entire states, darkening the sky. Okay, this could be a few examples of figurative language. This could be imagery because we can really picture that in our mind. The author's giving us a lot of sensory details. This could also be alliteration because you have the B sound repeated in black blizzards boiled up. Okay, so you could write black blizzards boiled up is an example of alliteration because the B sound is repeated. Or you could talk about how it's figurative language because the reader, it's imagery because the reader can picture in his or her mind what the author's describing. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for box 4. All right, and let's go down. Box 4 says, according to the text, what effect might the black blizzards have on the birds living in the area? And let's go back and read that last sentence so that you can picture in your mind what might happen to the birds. It says, terrifying wind-driven dust storms called black blizzards boiled up from the parched land and rolled across entire states, darkening the sky, advancing at 50 miles an hour as thousands of fleeing geese, ducks, and smaller birds raced for their lives ahead of the approaching storm. And so you need to think, what might happen to those birds if they aren't able to fly fast enough? And the reader is led to believe that these dust storms, that they even killed the birds that weren't able to fly past. And so in box 4A, we would write, the black blizzards will suffocate the birds living in the area because the dust will get into their lungs, keeping them from breathing. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 4B. It says, using this information in the text about the dust storms, how might a large dust storm affect the people working in the fields? Why do you think this? And so if the dust will affect the birds and cause them to suffocate and die, we can assume the same thing for the people working in the fields. In 4B, we would write, a large dust storm could kill people working in the fields if the dust gets into their lungs and suffocates them. Press pause to write down your answer. You could also write, a large dust storm could also injure or kill someone in the fields because of the powerful winds and dust hitting a person. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the paragraph. What factors contributed to the Dust Bowl? Explain your answer using evidence from the text. And you can use your notes for boxes 1 and 2 to help you write your paragraph.